There are a number of different ways that you can begin working on models to create something beyond the basic shapes that we get with our object primitives. So one of those ways is by using tools that extend any given geometry. So you can extend edges, you can extend polygons, and you can add more polygons or more edges to the things that you have selected. So what I'm going to do here is start looking at some of these polygonal extension tools. So I'm going to start just by making a quick selection right here on this object. So just a few polygons on the front. And we're going to look at some of the basic tools that we have here. You can see that in our basic tab of our modeling menu, we have an option here for bevel. So bevel is just going to take any individual faces that you have. Once we click, we'll see the handles pop up. And now we have two basic controls inside of our object handles. And those are going to be to extend the surface and pull it outwards. And if you look in the top view, this is pretty easy to see that the polygons are actually extending in the direction that they are facing. So since these polygons are facing slightly out on each side, they're extending and getting wider as we extend them. But if we look at it from the side or the front view, we'll see that they're not getting any taller because those polygons aren't pointing up or down. The vertices are essentially flush in that dimension. But as I pull this out, we'll see that it does get wider and wider. Okay, so that's going to be what the blue handle does. It will extend the surface forward. The red handle will shrink or expand the size of the extension. So notice in the top view, if I shrink this down such that it is extending straight forward, and we look at the front view or the right hand view, we'll see that it's actually, in order to do that, it's tapering these downward, and that's because those were not having any kind of expansion. In order to counter the expansion, I had to create a little bit of an inset with the vertical dimension. All right, so let's dive a little bit deeper into this tool here, because these kind of options are things that we'll see in other extension tools. So looking here on the left-hand side, this is where we get the options for any selected tool. So if I press the 0 key on the numeric keypad, that will actually maximize my tool settings so that they can take up this whole section. And now I can see some other options that we have. So we have the shift, which is going to be how far we've pulled the surface away. We have the inset, which is how much we have used this red handle to shrink or grow the selection. And then if we go down here, we can choose use material, which will allow us to apply a material to a new section. So if you're beveling something off of an existing model and you want to add a new material as you do so, you can do that by use material, and you can put in another material there. Another option that we have here is to group the polygons together. Now with that done, polygons, even if they're facing in slightly different directions, will all be grouped together. If I turn that off, you'll see that all of the polygons now go along their individual directions. So the polygons on the left go out to the left, on the right go out to the right, and now the top and bottom ones, since I have that inset, are no longer sticking together, but they're being separated. Sometimes this will be something that you want to do in order to split faces off from one another, but oftentimes the default of group polygons is a good one to have on so that you don't end up with a bunch of individual polygons separated out from the rest of the body. Now, one thing to note is that this can be something that's much more difficult to see if you're working on a flat surface. So I'm going to press Q to drop the tool, and then select some polygons up here at the top, and then press B, which is the hotkey for that bevel tool. And now if I click and drag this up, since all of these polygons are flat and don't have any directional connotation, they're not facing out or in or anything like that, if I turn off group polygons, it only makes a very subtle difference in the actual visual look of the polygons. And if you keep an eye, you can see that the change will happen on the edges where the newly extended polygons meet. So it's going to be these vertical edges on the middle, and then the edges across the face, these orange selected polygons. So watch those as I turn back on group polygons. You see that those edges get a little bit lighter. And that's because with this turned off, this is no longer a single edge running up here. It's actually two edges. It's an edge that belongs to this face and an edge that belongs to this face. And the same thing happens every other place where we have an edge that is meeting two polygons together. It will no longer be a single edge, and if we taper this a little bit, we'll see the difference. but it's actually individual edges. Now, this can be problematic if you are going to be working in subdivision surfaces, because if I take this model and press Shift Tab to turn it into subdivision surfaces, we'll see that down here we have one nice cohesive little bump that we've created. But up top, we now have a series of little domes. Now, this may be what you want, but it's important to know that this is what's happening, even though visually they look very similar. Again, the only telltale sign is going to be those slightly darkened edges. So if we press subdivide this, which we'll get into subdivision surfaces a little later, but you can press Shift Tab just to preview it, you'll see that definitely we have two different things going on here. Okay, moving on, let's go ahead and unsubdivide that and move to another object layer we have here, which is a square, and this is just a subdivided plane with a bunch of individual polygons. And now let's look at some of the other extension tools. So I'm going to select these polygons right here, and now I'm going to use the extrude tool. Now, in many ways, the extrude tool is very similar to the bevel tool, except you'll notice that the handles are different, and they appear to be essentially like the move tool handles. And that's because the extrude tool works in one direction regardless of the direction that the polygons are facing. So I can click this up, and then I can drag it over or over that way. You can see it doesn't take any it doesn't take into account any of the directions that the polygons are facing. So if I move back, for example, to my cylinder here, and I select a few polygons, let's make a little bigger selection this time, and I use the extrude tool, you'll see that I pull these out, and they're just going out the direction that I am pulling the handles. They don't widen or anything like that. And this can be important if you want to have a selection of a model that doesn't have any kind of taper with regards to the facing angle of the polygons. And that's going to be the main difference between this and the bevel tool. And we also don't have the option of controlling the tapering of this. So something to keep in mind there. Okay, moving on, I'm going to go over here to this side and select a few polygons, and let's look at the smooth shift tool. Again, so this is just another variation of the kind of tool that we see with the bevel tool, and what it does is it just pulls the faces, but you also get a taper command which shrinks and grows based on the actual dimensions of the extrusion, or the shift rather. So as we pull this up and we pull in, you'll see it actually shrinks down the size of that pyramid that it's creating. So this works a little bit differently than the bevel, and in some cases can be a useful one to use. I'm going to go ahead and drop that tool by pressing Q, and then click off in open space to deselect the polygons. Now next, let's move over here to kind of the side of this group of polygons, and I'm going to use the thicken tool. So this works very much like the bevel tool, except there's one big difference. So if I pull this forward and now we mouse around and look at the bottom side, you'll see that it has basically created an entire closed volume. So it has taken the original polygons that we've had and that we started to thicken. It takes those polygons, it flips them around so they're facing the opposite direction, and then we extend outward from that selection. So that can be very important if you want to, well, thicken something. So if I, for example, let's just take a little chunk of polygons here, and I'm going to cut these out and paste them into a new layer. So Control X, I could also copy them if I wanted with Control C, and then I'm going to create a new layer by pressing the N key. And I'm going to just paste these in with Control V. Now I'm going to hide the square so I can just see this selection here. Now with this selected, I can use the thicken tool to add some thickness to this. Great. All right, let's see what else we can do with this. So if I have these polygons selected, I'm going to use a linear fall off and then turn on the move tool. And let's see, I'm going to take this fall off and make it symmetrical. So you can see that in my fall off options here, I have an option for symmetric, and I'm going to make it symmetric at the end. Okay, and now I'm just going to pull this in towards the middle. And I'm going to set the shape preset of this to smooth. All right, so now when I pull up here with my tool handles, you'll see it's actually pulling up a bit, and it's creating a a peaked shape. So I only have a few polygons here, so it's not a super complex fall off, but it's now something other than a straight flat plane. So let's press Escape now to get rid of our fall off, and now I'm going to double click to select all of these and use the thicken tool, and then I'm just going to click and pull this out, and you can see that now instead of just a plane of polygons, I actually have a thicker piece of geometry that is closed. It has a front and a back, which is great if I want to subdivide that. So again, Shift Tab so I can preview my subdivision surfaces. I can see that now I actually have an entire kind of chunk of material. All right, so using extension tools is a very important part of the modeling process, and it will allow you to take any existing geometry that you have and move off into more space. So one last tool that we're going to look at here is the Edge Extend tool, and this is something that works on edges as opposed to polygons. So I'm going to go back to my square here where I now have an open edge, and I'm just going to select the edges that border that open space, and now I'm going to use my Edge Extend tool, which is found down under the Edge menu, and you'll see that here's Extend. This is a pretty commonly used one, and the hotkey is Z, so it's a good one to remember, the Z key, so that you don't have to go down to Edge and find that button. And now once I click in the viewport, you'll see that I get, again, kind of like move handles, but it's going to take this edge selection and it will extend it and make polygons that attach that edge to the edge that we had originally selected. So we can extend off our geometry that way. All right, so that does it for extension tools. You can use these in a lot of scenarios for creating additional attachments to your geometry. Next, we'll look at some ways that we can divide up our geometry in order to get more density and more complexity as we work on the models. Thanks, and I will see you in the next lesson.